Throughout modern history, people have entered wilderness areas, national parks, mountains, deserts, jungles, and never returned. In many of these cases, extensive searches were conducted. Evidence was collected. Reports were written. And yet, the final outcome remains unknown. What follows are 5 documented cases. These accounts avoid rumor and theory. They present only what is known, what was recorded, and what could not be explained. These are true disappearances in the wilderness. Case 1. Dennis Martin, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, June 1969. On June 14, 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Lloyd Martin was camping with his family near Spence Field in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The area sits at an elevation of over 4,900 feet and is surrounded by dense forest, steep slopes, and rocky terrain. Dennis was with his parents, grandparents, and several other families. All were experienced campers. In the late afternoon, Dennis and a few other children began playing hide-and-seek near the edge of the tree line. Witnesses stated that Dennis ran behind a bush, intending to surprise the others. When he did not reappear, adults initially assumed he had moved to another hiding spot. After several minutes, concern began to grow. A search of the immediate area was conducted. Dennis was not found. Park rangers were notified quickly. Within hours, organized search efforts were underway. Over the following weeks, more than 1,400 people participated in the search. This included park staff, trained volunteers, military personnel, and Green Berets experienced in survival and tracking. Search dogs were deployed. At one point, a scent was briefly detected near a rocky outcropping. That trail ended abruptly. Later that evening, a sudden storm moved through the mountains. Heavy rain fell. Conditions became dangerous. Any remaining scent trails were likely destroyed. During the search, a nearby family reported seeing a man carrying what appeared to be a child or bundle over his shoulder in the same general area. This sighting was investigated, but never confirmed. Despite weeks of searching ravines, streams, dense undergrowth, and cliff areas, no physical evidence of Dennis Martin was ever found. No clothing, no remains. The case remains unsolved. So, what could have happened? There are speculations. Dennis disappeared within minutes during daylight. My first thought was an animal. But then wouldn't there have been some kind of struggle, screaming, something? He was 6 years old, small for his age. The terrain was steep, wooded, and rugged. I've actually heard of other children disappearing in areas like this and not being found. Really strange. So, a sudden storm occurred shortly after his disappearance. And there was no physical evidence ever recovered. Search efforts were immediate, massive, and professional. Some speculated that Dennis may have fallen into a ravine, crevice, or dense undergrowth and was never located. People thought these things could have happened because the Smoky Mountains have hidden sinkholes, cliffs, and thick brush. A child could fall silently out of sight. Heavy rain may have moved or concealed remains. There are problems with these theories, though. Searchers covered ravines, streams, and drop-offs extensively. No scent trail, clothing, or bone fragments were ever found. Even decades later, nothing surfaced. This kind of brings to mind the things I've read about Bigfoot. How they appear, then disappear through a portal of some kind. Makes me wonder if this little boy was grabbed by something that could disappear into another realm. No scent trail, clothing, nothing. Then there's people that think maybe Dennis became lost, panicked, and succumbed to exposure. There was the sudden weather change. Children can move surprisingly far when they're scared. Hypothermia can occur even in mild temperatures when wet. But there are problems with this theory also. Children usually leave some trace. The search dogs did not track a continuance route, and no evidence appeared during later seasons or erosion. My first thought was a wild animal, like a black bear, attacked or carried Dennis away because black bears were present in the park. They can move quietly and quickly, and that could explain lack of remains. But there was no blood, torn clothing, or disturbance was found. Wildlife experts involved in the search found no supporting evidence. They say bear attacks on children are extremely rare. Awful thought. Then we come to the one thought that most would think. Dennis was taken by a person. People would consider this because a nearby family reported seeing a man carrying something over his shoulder. The disappearance was very rapid. Dennis vanished from a populated campsite area. But there are problems with this theory also. The sighting was never confirmed. No vehicle tracks or evidence of escape. Well, I would say there could have been someone out there living on the land. No vehicle needed. That thought is very scary. The terrain would make a quick getaway difficult, but again, if someone was living out there somewhere, no suspects or follow-up evidence emerged. Maybe Dennis wandered into restricted or hazardous activity. Green Berets were involved in the search. The Cold War era fueled distrust of secrecy, but there's no evidence to support this. Green Berets were there for siege assistance only. No documentation suggests restricted operations nearby. Something occurred that investigators could not identify or document. The case ended with zero physical evidence. The speed of disappearance defies typical patterns. Even seasoned search and rescue professionals expressed confusion. This is why the case remains open discussion, though officially inactive. So what do you think happened to Dennis? If you have any ideas, please let us know. Case 2. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. Ural Mountains, Soviet Union, February 1959. In January 1959, 9 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute began a winter expedition in the northern Ural Mountains. The group consisted of students and recent graduates, all trained in long-distance skiing and cold weather survival. Their leader was 20-year-old Igor Dyatlov. The group planned a multi-week trek across remote mountain terrain. When they failed to return by their expected date, search efforts were initiated. On February 26, searchers located the group's tent on a slope of Kholat-Syakhl mountain. The tent was partially collapsed and covered with snow. Investigators observed that the tent had been cut open from the inside. Footprints were found leading away from the tent toward a forested area downhill. Some of the footprints were made by individuals wearing socks or barefoot, despite temperatures reaching -30 degrees Celsius. Over the next several weeks, the bodies of all 9 hikers were recovered in different locations. Some had died from hypothermia. Others had severe internal injuries, including fractured ribs and skull damage. These injuries were compared by medical examiners to those caused by high-impact force. There were no corresponding external wounds. One woman was found missing her tongue and parts of her facial tissue. Official reports attributed this to post-mortem environmental exposure. Traces of radiation were detected on some of the hikers' clothing. In May 1959, the Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died due to an unknown compelling force. The case was closed. No single explanation has accounted for all documented findings. So the most accepted theory today for what may have happened is a delayed slab avalanche that struck the tent area. I mean, they did cut their way out of the tent to escape immediate danger and fled downhill to avoid further collapse. The tent damage was consistent with sudden pressure and injuries on some hikers matched blunt force trauma. Later studies concluded a slab avalanche was plausible even though the slope appeared mild. The problems with this, though, is there was no obvious avalanche debris documented at the time. Footprints remained visible leading away from the tent, and some injuries were extremely severe and unevenly distributed. Some say there could have been extreme katabatic winds or infrasound panic, meaning powerful downslope winds created infrasound, which can cause anxiety, panic, and disorientation. So, the hikers fled the tent in a confused or panicked state. What supports this theory is the area is known for severe, sudden wind conditions. It would explain why experienced hikers would abandon shelter improperly dressed. Still, the problems with this is, it doesn't explain the internal injuries or the infrasound effects are still debated and not fully predictable. Could have had something to do with hypothermia. Hypothermia can cause irrational decision-making, and some hikers remove clothing due to paradoxical undressing. Maybe their groups fractured as cognition failed. The evidence supporting this is the sub-zero temperatures. Clothing redistribution among the bodies and some deaths were clearly due to hypothermia, but this doesn't explain the tent slicing or massive trauma injuries. Hypothermia alone does not cause crushed ribs or skull fractures. Secret Soviet military testing could be one of the suggestions. Shockwaves could have caused internal injuries without external wounds. There were some radiation traces on some clothing. There were also reports of glowing orbs in the sky that night. And the Soviet secrecy during investigation is strange. But there are no confirmed military test records for that night. Radiation levels were low and explainable by industrial exposure. Also, there was no blast residue found. So, there was heavy snow buildup that partially collapsed the tent, and panic seemed to ensue, causing them to exit quickly and regroup later. The evidence supporting this was the tent deformation and snow accumulation patterns. Again, doesn't explain severe injuries found later, and doesn't fully justify fleeing far downhill. Seems like conflict within the group escalated, but this theory is mostly dismissed because there were no defensive wounds. No evidence of struggle, and group cohesion remained evident. Shared clothing, attempts to survive. Which brings us to rare atmospheric or environmental event. Something sudden, frightening, and not well understood. This idea persists because official Soviet conclusions cited an unknown compelling force. No theory explains every detail perfectly. That's why Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most discussed wilderness mysteries in modern history. So what do you think happened to them? Tell us in the comments if you have an idea. I'd love to hear it. Case 3. Everett Roos, Canyonlands, Escalante, Utah, November 1934. Everett Roos was a 20-year-old writer, poet, and artist who traveled alone throughout the American Southwest during the early 1930s. He was known for his desire to live simply and explore remote wilderness areas. In November 1934, Roos set out with 2 burros into the canyon country near Escalante, Utah. He intended to explore the area for several weeks. Roos was known to write letters regularly. When no correspondence arrived, concern grew among friends and family. Searchers later located his campsite. His supplies were present. His burros were found alive and grazing nearby. Roos was not found. Near the area, a rock inscription was discovered reading, Nemo, 1934. Roos had used the name Nemo in earlier writings. Over the decades, several discoveries of skeletal remains were claimed to be Roos. Each was later ruled out through forensic analysis. No confirmed trace of Everett Roos has ever been found. His disappearance remains unexplained. So, accidental death is the most widely accepted theory here. The canyon region is extremely dangerous, with sheet cliffs, narrow ledges, flash flood zones, and unstable rock. Roos traveled along, without modern safety equipment. So a fall into a canyon, crevice, or river could easily result in no recoverable remains and rapid destruction of evidence. His burro were found alive, suggesting he did not plan to disappear intentionally. Roos likely dies from a fall or environmental exposure, and his body was never recovered. Southern Utah is prone to sudden flash floods, even without rain nearby, and flash floods can sweep bodies far downstream, destroy campsites, and leave minimal evidence. Weather records indicate seasonal flood risk during the time he disappeared. Roos may have been caught in a flood or succumbed to exposure, with remains carried away or buried. There's another theory. Homicide or foul play. Roos occasionally encountered ranchers, traders, and travelers. Some locals later claimed her may have crossed paths with individuals engaged in illegal activities. The complete absence of his remains has fueled suspicion. No physical evidence of violence. No confirmed witnesses. No motive ever established. Possible but unsupported by evidence. The idea that Roos chose to vanish and start a new life has been speculated. The inscription, Nemo, 1934, was found. His philosophical writings about solitude and freedom. It's unlikely, though, because he left behind journals, artwork, and personal items he deeply valued, and he had plans for future travels. There's no evidence of him living elsewhere after his disappearance. DNA testing ruled out. Later claims that he lived under another identity. There is no official determination of Everett Roos's fate. The most accepted conclusion among experts is he likely died accidentally in the Utah Canyon wilderness, and his remains were never recovered due to terrain and environmental conditions. His disappearance remains one of the most enduring unsolved cases in American wilderness history. So any ideas on what could have happened to him? I think this is really interesting. And maybe he ran into someone or something that he didn't expect. Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon, Boquete, Panama, April 2014. On April 1st, 2014, Dutch tourists Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon went hiking on the Pianista Trail near Boquete, Panama. The trail is known, but leads into dense cloud forest beyond marked paths. The women carried phones, a digital camera, and limited supplies. They did not return that afternoon. Search efforts began. No signs of violence were found in their room. Phone records later showed multiple attempts to contact emergency services over several days. Most calls failed due to lack of signal. Months later, a backpack belonging to the women was found along a riverbank. Inside were their phones, camera, money, and personal items. The items were dry and intact. The camera contained daytime photos from the hike and a series of nighttime photographs taken days later. The images showed terrain, vegetation, and personal belongings. The women were not clearly visible. Partial skeletal remains were later recovered in separate locations along the river. Authorities concluded the deaths were accidental. Questions remain. Well, the most official explanation would seem to be they got lost and succumbed to exposure. They may have wandered off the trail into dense jungle and river systems. Phone data suggests they survived several days after going missing, and night photos may indicate attempts to signal or find their way. One or both of them may have been injured early on, and they had limited movement, so the other stayed with them. Strong currents and seasonal flooding could explain their scattered remains and the condition of the bones. Jungle environments can significantly alter evidence. It's been debated that there could have been third-party involvement, but it's debated. There was unusual evidence patterns, but no conclusive proof supports this. The official ruling is accidental deaths, but this is still debated due to unanswered details. Anybody know about this case? Do you have any ideas what could have happened to them? Case 5. Brandon Swanson, rural Minnesota, May 2008. On May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson was driving home late at night after celebrating the end of the school year. His car went into a ditch along a rural road. Brandon called his parents for help. He believed he knew his location. He remained on the phone with his father while walking toward what he thought were town lights. Throughout the call, Brandon described landmarks that did not match his actual location. At one point, Brandon suddenly said, "Oh, shit." The call disconnected. Extensive searches followed. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of a river, where it stopped. No trace of Brandon Swanson was ever found. This is a very interesting case, because the first time I read about it, I got the impression that he had walked into another dimension. He seemed to be in a different place the way he described it on the phone, like he didn't recognize his surroundings. Some say it could have been an accidental drowning because his phone cut out near the Yellow Medicine River. Scent dogs tracked him to the river's edge. People say this is the most likely explanation. The area contains steep embankments, culverts, and ravines. This could explain sudden exclamation and disappearance. It was cold and dark, and it could have impaired his judgment. Brandon misidentified landmarks during the call, and they never found his remains. There's a lot of dense vegetation and flooding there that could conceal evidence, and the area had been searched multiple times. There is another theory that he may have went into another dimension like I mentioned earlier, and I find that the most interesting theory yet. What do you think? Do you know about this case? Let's hear your ideas about what may have happened to Brandon. These cases share common elements: experienced search teams, extensive efforts, and unanswered questions. They remain open records, documented, unresolved.